Have you ever stopped to think about how our ego shapes our reality? Welcome to a deep dive into a topic that few dare to explore. In this video, we will unravel the mysteries of the ego, understand how it can be both our ally and our enemy, and how it can distort the perception we have of ourselves and the world around us. Get ready to reflect, and who knows, discover a new version of yourself. Stay with us and let's go on this transformative journey together. The ego is a multifaceted concept that, in psychology, refers to the aspect of the personality that deals with reality and strives to balance instinctual desires and the demands of the outside world. In simple terms, the ego is the part of us that sees itself as an individual self, distinct from others. Although the concept has deep roots in philosophy and psychology, especially in the writings of Sigmund Freud, the notion of ego transcends purely academic definitions. The ego is not just a mental entity. It embodies our feelings of self-esteem, self-image, and self-knowledge. Each of us develops a conception of how we see ourselves, based on personal experiences, social interactions, and even society's expectations. The ego acts as an internal judge, often influencing our everyday decisions, our reactions to criticism, and our capacity for empathy. Despite its role as a psychological stabilizer, the ego can also become an adversary. When left unchecked, it can lead to selfish behaviors or an excessive need for validation, turning everyday operations into emotional battles. Therefore, understanding what the ego is the first step to recognizing its influence in our daily lives. The history of the concept of ego goes back many centuries, with its roots in philosophical and spiritual thought. One of the first philosophers to discuss the identity of the I was René Descartes, who uttered the famous phrase, "I think, therefore I am." This thought emphasizes the importance of self-awareness in the concept of ego. Following this reasoning, philosophers such as Baruch Spinoza and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz expanded the discussion on the nature of being and individuality, leading to a deeper reflection on the self. In psychology, the ego was formally defined by Sigmund Freud at the beginning of the 20th century. For Freud, the ego is one of the three psychic instances, together with the ID and the superego, that make up the human personality. The ID represents the basic instincts and desires, while the superego embodies the moral and social values we have learned. The ego, therefore, acts as a mediator between these two forces. This tripartite structure of the human psyche was revolutionary, providing a new lens for understanding human motivation and behaviors. Since then, the concept of ego has evolved and been reinterpreted by several theorists, including Carl Jung, who brought the ego closer to more symbolic and archetypal aspects of the human psyche. This rich history reveals not only the complexity of the ego, but also its ongoing relevance in discussions about identity and human behavior. Ego development begins in childhood and is a result of the constant interactions we have with our environment. From the first years of life, children begin to realize that they are separate entities from other people. This recognition is essential for the development of the ego, which adjusts and shapes itself based on lived experiences. Firstly, the ego is formed through the recognition of the need for immediate gratification, often called the ID, which represents instinctual desires. As children grow, they go through a socialization process where they learn to differentiate between accepted and unacceptable behaviors in their culture. This involves the development of social and emotional skills and the internalization of family and social norms, which are fundamental to the formation of the ego. Adolescence is a crucial period, as it is when many of the ego-related challenges and conflicts intensify. Social pressures, the search for identity, and the construction of self-image become central at this stage of development. The ego, therefore, adapts and can strengthen or weaken depending on social and emotional support, experiences of success or failure, and external validation received. Thus, the ego is a dynamic phenomenon that continues to evolve throughout life in response to new experiences and changes in circumstances. The role of the ego in personal identity is one of the most relevant aspects of human understanding. The ego is not just our self-image, but also includes how we perceive ourselves in relation to the world around us. It influences our decisions, relationships, and even the way we deal with challenges and adversity. When a person has a healthy ego, They are able to appreciate themselves while also being empathetic and recognizing the importance of others. On the other hand, an inflated ego can lead to relationship problems, arrogance, and a constant desire for external validation. The ego acts as a filter through which we interpret our experiences and construct our personal narrative. This narrative is fundamental to how we relate to others and how we find our place in society. Furthermore, the way the ego is shaped can impact mental health. Individuals who feel constantly threatened in their identities may experience anxiety, depression, and other emotional problems. Therefore, understanding the role and dynamics of the ego in our lives is essential not only for self-knowledge, but also for cultivating healthy relationships. From self-knowledge, we can begin to challenge it, redefining our limits and making space for a more authentic and integrated self. The ego, in its incessant search for validation and recognition, often distorts the way we perceive reality. It filters our experiences and emotions, leading us to interpret them in ways that align with our self-image or what we want to believe. This phenomenon is dangerous because it often prevents us from seeing the truth of everyday situations. For example, when someone receives criticism, the ego can distort this perception, transforming it from simple feedback into a personal attack, making the person feel devalued or attacked. This distortion can be even more pronounced when it comes to self-assessment. It is common for people to underestimate their qualities and achievements while over-evaluating their flaws. By becoming aware of this ego behavior, we can begin to question our first impressions and reactions, allowing for a more balanced interpretation of reality. This awareness helps us develop a more open and receptive mindset, favoring actions and reactions based on authenticity and truth about ourselves and the world around us. In everyday life, we encounter several situations that exemplify how the ego operates, shaping our perception and behavior. For example, when comparing herself to her colleagues, a woman may feel that she is never as good as others, whether in terms of appearance, professional achievements, or relationships. This non-objective and distorted comparison, driven by the ego's need to stand out or protect itself, can generate feelings of inadequacy. Another example can be seen in social interactions. During a conversation, if someone interrupts, the ego may accuse them of lack of respect, while the reality may be that the interruption occurred in a moment of excitement or urgency. This preconceived interpretation can create unnecessary conflicts. Furthermore, when a compliment is given, the ego can quickly list the person's mistakes or flaws, causing them to disregard or minimize the recognition received. Such examples show that everyday life is full of opportunities for the ego to distort the way we see ourselves and others. Understanding these nuances can be the first step towards a more harmonious relationship with yourself. The impact of the ego on interpersonal relationships can be profound and often problematic. When the ego is at the forefront, interactions become focused on realizing what others think of us and the recognition we seek. This can lead to misunderstandings and conflicts. For example, in a friendship, if one party feels like they aren't getting the attention they deserve, the ego can make that person feel like the other doesn't care. This distortion can cause resentment, when in reality, the other party may just be busy or facing their own challenges. Therefore, relationships are often affected by interpretations that have more to do with ego projection than with the real actions of others. Additionally, ego can cause people to behave defensively, creating a barrier that prevents true emotional connection. To break this negative cycle, it is necessary to cultivate empathy, understanding, and open communication, allowing relationships to be based more on authenticity than on the need for validation presented by the ego. Self-awareness is an essential tool for dealing with the challenges brought by the ego. Being self-aware means having the ability to observe ourselves without judgment, recognizing our feelings, thoughts, and behaviors in different situations. This level of consciousness allows us to notice when the ego is being activated and how it is influencing our perception and reactions. By becoming aware of our own ego distortions, we can make wiser decisions and respond to situations in a more balanced way. For example, when receiving criticism, a self-aware person would be able to realize that this criticism is not a personal attack, but a learning opportunity. It is also possible to develop the ability to put yourself in others' shoes, recognizing that your actions and words can be influenced by your own egos. In this way, Self-awareness not only helps us understand ourselves, but also improves our relationships, as it allows us to act more intelligently and empathetically, creating a space where everyone can thrive and evolve. Techniques for ego disidentification are valuable tools to help redefine our relationship with the inner self. The first approach is the practice of meditation. When meditating, we become observers of our thoughts, allowing us to realize that we are not our emotions or our story. Meditation helps us create space between ourselves and the narratives that the ego tries to impose on us. Another effective technique is self-affirmation, which involves reaffirming our qualities and virtues. In doing so, we can see that our identity goes beyond the external approval or criticism we receive. Writing a diary can also be a powerful resource. By recording our thoughts and feelings, we can identify patterns of behavior that are ego-driven. The practice of mindfulness, which involves being present in the moment without judgment, helps us stop and observe before reacting. This is especially useful in moments of conflict, where the ego tends to manifest itself more intensely. By learning to identify these patterns, we can gradually disengage from the narratives the ego pushes us towards, allowing a more authentic space for the genuine self to emerge. Stories of personal transformation often reveal how the process of ego disidentification can lead to significant changes in people's lives. A woman named Anna, for example, spent her life seeking approval in every area, from her work to her personal relationships. After a near-death experience, he decided to reevaluate his life. Instead of identifying with the endless search for validation, she began to explore what really made her happy. Anna signed up for a painting course, something she always wanted to do, but never had the courage. Over time, she discovered that painting not only filled her with joy, but also helped her express her emotions in a healthy way. Her story spread among her friends, inspiring others to venture beyond their own egos. Similar transformations can be seen with other women who decided to break away from the social expectations that imprison them. The story of Maria, a retired teacher, shows how accepting her own vulnerability allowed her to connect with other women in support groups, creating deep bonds that were not possible before. These stories are a testament to the power of transformation and true human connection when the ego is no longer the protagonist. Another story of personal transformation is that of Claudia, who always had a very inflated ego due to her professional success. She was recognized by everyone, but privately, she felt alone and disconnected. A health crisis forced her to stop and reflect on her life. During this period, he began reading about spirituality and became interested in humility practices. He then decided to volunteer at a shelter for vulnerable young people. By placing herself in a position where she was not the expert, it proved to be a moment of great learning. Interactions with young people helped her realize that their struggles were similar to her own, and that true strength lies in vulnerability and genuine connection. Over time, Claudia learned to celebrate not only her achievements, but the achievements of others around her. She started to listen more, put herself in other people's shoes, and value the experiences and stories of those around her. This new understanding brought her a peace that she had never found in her career, and, thus, Claudia became a mentor who now helps others find their own path. Practicing humility is one of the most effective ways to deconstruct the ego. Humility allows us to recognize that we are neither superior nor inferior to others, but part of a greater whole. One way to cultivate this practice is through gratitude. By recognizing what we have and the people around us who contribute to our well-being, we begin to shift our perspective. The art of listening is also a powerful way to practice humility. Instead of focusing on how we can shine, by listening carefully to others, we show respect and consideration. Another practical exercise is to put yourself in situations where we are not the experts. By participating in groups or social activities where we are new, we can experience humility in action. For example, when learning a new skill, we face the possibility of making mistakes, and instead of feeling bad about it, we can see it as part of learning and growing. When we integrate humility into our lives, we create a more authentic connection with others, and this can be transformative not only for us but also for those around us. Social networks have become a central space in many people's lives, offering a platform to share moments, thoughts, and achievements. However, this virtual environment also has the ability to feed our ego in ways that can be harmful. Constant interaction with likes, comments, and shares can create a feeling of instant validation and, at the same time, generate a dependence on this validation for self-esteem. The need to please and be accepted by others intensifies, leading many people to present idealized versions of themselves. This search for a robust ego on social media can lead us to neglect our true self, making our happiness dependent on other people's perception. Furthermore, the social media algorithm frequently promotes content that reinforces these positions, selecting what they consider to be most attractive. Thus, we feed a continuous cycle where the ego stands out, often at the expense of authenticity and genuine relationships. Reflecting on how social networks influence our identity is crucial to begin to understand the deep connection between our ego and our online behavior. Social comparison is a common practice on social media, where we often come across carefully edited portraits of others' lives. This phenomenon can exacerbate feelings of inadequacy and insecurity, as we tend to measure our worth in relation to what we see on screens. For many women over 50, this comparison can be especially challenging as they grapple with issues of aging and identity. The perception that others seem to be leading their lives more successfully or happily can directly affect self-esteem. Images of youthfulness and success shot virtually can create a disconnect between who we really are and what we think we should be. The impact of social comparison on self-esteem is profound, often leading to feelings of jealousy and dissatisfaction. This reaction can be detrimental to our emotional well-being and, at the same time, distance us from accepting our own worth. In this context, it is essential to develop self-compassion skills and recognize that social networks do not offer an accurate portrayal of reality. By focusing on our own achievements and merits, we can regain healthy and realistic self-esteem. For a healthy use of social networks, it is essential to establish some strategies that help create a positive and balanced virtual environment. Firstly, it is important to practice self-criticism and question the content we consume. Instead of getting carried away by the avalanche of perfect images, try to follow profiles that bring authenticity and representation, or that inspire and motivate in a realistic way. Additionally, consider setting limits on the time you spend online. Disconnecting periodically can be a great way to reevaluate your relationship with your own ego and the way you feel about yourself, away from comparisons and external pressure. Another significant strategy is to cultivate a circle of support, where you can share feelings and experiences with real friends who value who you are beyond your networks. True interaction generates meaningful conversations, which promote appreciation and recognition of the self, shifting the focus away from online validation. These practices not only help maintain mental health, but also encourage a healthier relationship with technology, allowing us to enjoy its benefits without being sucked in by its negative effects. The future of our relationship with the online ego promises to be dynamic as technologies and platforms evolve. New generations are starting to question the value of numbers, like likes and followers, compared to meaningful and authentic interactions. This shift may indicate a broader movement towards a less competitive and more collaborative digital culture. However, challenges persist, especially for women over 50, who may feel even more pressured to adapt. Awareness about the harmful effects of online validation is growing, which could lead to a new approach more focused on emotional and collective well-being. The future suggests potential for creating digital communities that prioritize acceptance, valuing experience and genuine exchange. Finding a balance between the use of networks and preserving self-esteem will be fundamental. Digital education, which teaches people to read critically and interact consciously on social media, will be a valuable tool. Therefore, the ability to navigate the ego in the digital age will be crucial, and the change in perspective can bring new opportunities for healthy and fulfilled aging. After exploring the complexity of the ego throughout the previous chapters, it is important to summarize the main lessons that can guide us on our emotional and psychological journey. Firstly, we understand that the ego is not a villain. It is an essential part of our personality that helps shape our identity and interactions. However, we have learned that the ego can become an obstacle when it turns against ourselves, generating insecurities and harmful behaviors. When we analyze the phases of ego development, we realize that it is strongly linked to the experiences of childhood, youth and adulthood, in which each phase presents unique challenges for self-image. Refining our awareness of how the ego operates in our lives allows us to cultivate a more authentic sense of who we are. When we can distinguish ego impulses from our true desires and needs, we make space for a fuller life and resist the pressure to seek external validation. This learning invites us to take a careful look at our emotions and constant reflections that promote self-knowledge. The new generation, which grows up in a context where they are increasingly connected, is changing the way they interact and understand the world around them. Instead of following the traditional model of ego-centered individualism, many young people are prioritizing collaboration and solidarity. This phenomenon is driven by a growing awareness of social and environmental problems, and the desire to create a fairer and more sustainable future. For example, social movements that have gone viral on social media have raised questions about equality, climate justice, and human rights, showing how collective action can generate significant change. This new perspective also makes young people more critical of what they value and how they define success, preferring to measure their worth by their positive impact on the lives of others. Furthermore, interactivity and the search for authenticity in interpersonal relationships are leading to a new way of connecting, which challenges the idea of ego as a barrier between people. Thus, the new generation offers hope that we can move away from the traps of ego and seek a future where empathy and understanding prevail. Technologies and social networks profoundly shape our interactions and self-image, and they can be a double-edged sword when it comes to the human ego. On the one hand, these platforms offer unprecedented opportunities to connect, share ideas, and collaborate on global levels. On the other hand, hyperexposure and the search for validation through likes and comments can aggravate the internal struggle with the ego, leading to harmful comparisons and a crisis of self-esteem. As social media becomes a reflection of our lives, it is crucial to develop a healthy use of these tools that promotes authentic connections and helps demystify the idealized image that the ego often projects. A more mindful approach can allow us to enjoy the positive side of technology, helping to build communities and support networks. To this end, educating yourself about the effectiveness of online interactions and critically analyzing the impact social media has on us is a vital step. Thus, it would not be an exaggeration to say that the future of the ego in the digital age depends on our ability to use technology as an instrument of empowerment and connection rather than competition and comparison. Reflecting on the ego's journey and its role in our lives is a call to action for all of us. Recognizing that the ego can be both an ally and an enemy enables us to adopt a more conscious stance about how we relate to ourselves and others. Instead of getting carried away by patterns of behavior that perpetuate competition and comparison, we can turn our attention to collaboration, learning from collective experiences and valuing the diversity that surrounds us. This shift in perspective doesn't happen overnight, but it takes effort and commitment to dismantle the narratives we've been taught. The first step can be as simple as encouraging open conversations about feelings and insecurities, breaking the cycle of silence and shame around the ego. We call on all women over 50 to embrace this transition, recognizing the wisdom that experience brings and coming together to shape a future that celebrates collectivity and empathy. After all, we can be the change we want to see in the world, promoting an environment where the ego is not the protagonist, but rather love for others and the search for a common good. The ego is an essential part of who we are, but when it is not managed properly, it can become an obstacle to our happiness and relationships. By cultivating self-awareness and humility, we can de-identify ego distortions and make space for a more authentic and meaningful life. We are curious to hear your stories. What kind of personal account or transformation about the ego would you like to see in our next videos? What experiences have you had with your own ego? Have you felt dominated by him at any point in your life? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video, where we will continue to explore the complexity of the ego and its implications in our lives.